let's go ahead and talk about the Reformation. That didn't work well, but we'll try to figure that out later about how to do that. But yeah, the Reformation, of course, I do have a good definition of it if you want, like what the Reformation was. We go to the slide right here. I can show you real quick here, but let me pull it up real quick here. But yeah, of course. So, what was the Reformation? I guess the first question we need to ask about what was the Reformation itself, which I do have a slide about that, which right here. Yeah, it was mostly a religious movement, a Christian religious movement, of course, that started in the 1500s, like close to 1517, you can see. And it led to the rise of Protestantism. So, yeah, the Protestant Reformation, of course, is the other name that they also call it as well. And, of course, it was started by Martin Luther. Of course, so you hopefully researched who Martin Luther was, but Martin Luther was this German monk and theology professor that was one of the first major Protestant reformers that started the Reformation. He was from actually Saxony, which is in the Holy Roman Empire, which was called Germany back in those days. And what caused it to start was that Luther basically disproved of what the church teachings were going, like their practices at the time. And if you go to this slide here, there was a thing you may have heard of called indulgences or an indulgence, basically. Indulgence was something the church was selling to people where they could basically a remission of their punishments of sin. So if they had relatives that were in purgatory, they could get out and go to heaven. And so and Luther was pretty mad. There was this preacher. I got a picture of Luther right here. Of course, one of the most famous figures of the whole Reformation, Martin Luther. And let me see where he is exactly. But there was a preacher named, he was a Catholic friar. His name was Johann Tetzel. He was going around, I guess, where Saxony is in Germany, selling indulgences to people. And Tetzel was raising money at the time for the Catholic Church to mostly rebuild St. Peter's Basilica. And so Luther thought this was wrong because he believed that, only God could set the punishment for people's sins that were in purgatory or whatever. And eventually, as you know, a lot of Protestants later get rid of purgatory and they only have the idea of, heaven and hell eventually. So that's what started it. And you saw that video, which kind of messed up. We couldn't hear any sound on it, but it led to him, eventually posting the 95 Theses, a so-called thesis door. I'll put it up here for you. But the thesis, I don't know if you heard of the thesis door. It's the they call it the All Saints Church, which is in Wittenberg. I'll put it up here on the board for you if you want. But Luther posted this thing. I'll put it in. Where is it? I need that slide real quick here. But Luther was the one that eventually posted that to that front door, as you saw in that video, that short video right there. And anyway, they eventually inscribe it in there. The actual 95 Theses, of course. I do got a picture of it too, the 95 Theses, at least of the actual book, which is right here. The book mostly it basically complained about the 95 about the indulgences and also the corrupt practices of the church at the time, which is one of the causes of why the Reformation started in the 16th century and then continued into the 17th century as a whole, because The Reformation usually starts 1517 when he posted the 95 Theses, and a lot of people think it goes up to like maybe 1648. Anyways, that's basically how the Reformation got started. Then there was a pope, if you've heard about this, the Catholic Church named Pope Leo X, who you see here on the right. Of course, the Pope didn't agree with what Luther wrote. And the Pope eventually sent him a letter. I think it's called a papal bull, if you know about this. And he condemned what Luther wrote, and banned a lot of the parts of it, of the 95 Theses. And he threatened him with excommunication if he didn't recant. It's not what he was writing, Martin Luther. And so if you know about what Luther did, he took the papal bull and he burned it at that side of that tree right there. Just sometimes called the Lutherreich, I think is what the Germans call it, the Lutherreich. And make sure you mute your mic, please. And see if I can mute it. But you muted it? Okay, good. I don't think you did. Mute your mic, please. And so at the side of that tree is where he burned it. And so I think that's where the Reformation began at that point. Let me see. Can I mute your mic? Let me see. Hold on. Let me try to fix that. You need to mute it, or either mute it or put in headphones, like into your headphone jack. If you can't mute it, please. All right. So anyway, so that's initially how it got started. You're gonna have to mute your mic, please. Now, so because of that, that led to the rise of Lutheranism next that occurred. And Lutheranism is, of course, one of the first Protestant religions that begins in Europe because of the Reformation. And a lot of the princes, Protestants that were in Europe, which didn't agree, with what the Catholic Church was doing to Luther, decided to break away. They felt like Luther was getting, the shaft, about what was going on. And so the people that didn't agree with Luther were called Protestants, the term they started using. And then over time, like any kind of, I guess, religion that broke away from the Catholic Church was called like a Protestant type faith. And eventually, the Lutherans would take a lot of the churches, like especially in northern Germany, and start creating their own Lutheran churches. And you can see some of the changes they started making. They took away the Catholic Mass. They got rid of a lot of the sacraments. Like they got rid of 5 of the 7 sacraments in the Catholic Church. They emphasized a lot on the Bible, is what they did, and preaching. And I think there's some information here if you want more on Lutheranism, but you can see the differences like between the Lutheran faith and the Catholic faith. You can see they still believe in, Jesus and all that, but Lutheranism, one of the big differences between it was justification by faith alone. They believed that belief in Jesus was the key to salvation. Anyway, I'm not sure where we're going to end class. If you send me a message about that, but we'll have to see. Maybe it might be at an hour. Well, around 11 probably. But anyway, that's one difference, of course. Of course, they put a lot of emphasis on the Bible. Belief in Jesus, belief in the Bible is the key to salvation. They only kept 2 of the sacraments: baptism, which they still do infant baptism, of course, Lutherans, and of course, communion, which a lot of times is called sometimes the Lord's Supper. Of course, a lot of the princes had control over the churches or religious political leaders in Europe, whereas the Pope, was the authority of the church still as a whole. Of course, the Catholic Church kept all the sacraments, as you can see. Priests could marry. That's one thing they started doing that was totally different, whereas the Catholic Church, priests, can't marry. They have to be celibate and all that. And then another big thing that was a difference, of course, is the whole thing about the communion. I'll talk about that later, but that was a big controversy between the Lutheran and the Catholic Church, which they did agree on overall. What else? Got yeah, and I do have that thing there. You're gonna have to put a mic. You're gonna have to put a headphones in. You keep coming in, and you're causing problems. So you got to find a way. If you have any headphones or earbuds, you're gonna have to put those in, and that'll prevent the echoing. But anyway, the difference between Luther and Luther and, of course, Lutheranism and the Catholic Church is consubstantiation. Is this belief that the blood and wine undergo a spiritual change where Christ is present, but the bread and wine are not transformed, which the Catholic Church believes in. And then, of course, the Catholic Church believes that there was a miracle, that there was a transformation, of course, that occurred. So that's one of the big differences between, like, Lutheranism and Catholicism. Well, I can't mute his mic. What the problem is with that. Anyway, but you're gonna have to mute your mic somehow, or get headphones, please. Now, the other thing that happened too was that they gave Luther one more chance at what they call the Diet of Worms. What is the Diet of Worms? It's like the main assembly of the Holy Roman Empire at the time, which was run by the Emperor Charles V. And they wanted Luther to, of course, to recant his ideas at the time. And so Luther went there. It was in May of 1820, not 1821. That's a typo. I don't know why that's on there. Let's have a typo in there on my thing. But May of 1521 is when it is actually. It's when that was. And let me write that. It's actually May 25th, 1521 is the actual date. I have to remove you because, I mean, you're causing echoing. So you're going to have to find some way to control the echoing because it's causing a problem. So now, what happened was the Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, what he did was he issued what they call the Edict of Worms. And what the Edict of Worms did was it declared Luther an outlaw and, of course, banned his writings. And what was going on at the time was that the ruler of Saxony, Frederick, Prince Frederick, was, allowing him to live in his castle and begin writing the New Testament, which was written in German. And so that led to the Protestant, movement, starting with the Lutherans as a whole. And so that's part of why the Protestant Reformation was able to take off, because you had these local rulers that were in Germany that didn't agree with the Catholic Church or the Holy Roman Emperor. And so that's what led to it later. And I'll get to it later, but they eventually, what occurred was that Charles eventually had to create this kind of peace agreement between the Lutherans and the Catholics that was called the Peace of Augsburg. But I'll get to that later when that is. All right, so that's basically what happened and how Lutheranism and Protestantism started as a whole. Now, let me also get into what they call Calvinism as well. Calvinism was also another form of Protestantism that also started in. Do you ever get headphones? I don't know, because I don't want to put them back in. Did you ever get headphones? No? Well, you're going to have to figure something out. So I can't put you back in. because you got the echoing. I don't know what's going on, but you need to put headphones on. Somehow turn your mic off. It's, kind of a problem. I'll have to email you about it probably. So, but anyway, there was John Calvin, who I need to talk about, who was famous during the course of the Reformation. Calvin was one of the most influential in the Reformation, and he published a work in 1536 that was called the Institutes of the Christian Religion. It was one of the first theological works that kind of summarized what all the Protestant beliefs were. And it was kind of like a Protestant textbook, like on how to do the religion and all their religious services. And Calvinism, as they call it for short, as you know, was based on some other ideas that were a little different from what Luther was doing in the Catholic Church. And they viewed men and women as being sinful as in nature overall. And they believed in a couple things that are kind of famous. One, of course, is you probably heard about predestination, what that is. Predestination. Predestination was a Protestant belief that basically Protestants, there's some stuff I'll show up later about that, but Protestants believe that some of these Protestants believe that from the beginning, God had already elected a certain few that would be saved, from damnation and going to hell. The Calvinists only believed that there was heaven and hell. And so basically, they believed only a certain amount of people. And I think I forgot how many it was that they thought it was, like 100 to 200,000, I think was at least back then. They only thought it was only a small amount of people that would actually go to heaven. It's crazy about that. And they call it the elect. That's what they dubbed it. Also, the Calvins also believed in theocracy a lot. Theocracy was also big, religious theocracy. That's where religious leaders control the state instead of secular type rulers like we have today. So all the laws of the state or city, whatever, would be run by religious leaders. They're based on religious laws. Like I've got examples right there. You see, everyone has to attend a religion class or go to church, basically. Can't wear certain kind of colors and things like that. Can't play certain kinds of games. They even ban drinking and stuff like that. You can't drink alcohol. And so any kind of violation of what the theocracy type laws are, they could, throw you in jail. They could fine you. There are even cases like in Geneva and other areas, which was in Switzerland. They actually executed people that didn't follow, some of these religious ideas. And a lot of these ideas also influence, probably won't talk about it today. You ever heard of Presbyterianism? I'll kind of mention about that too. But I don't know if you ever heard of John Knox. Oh, good, he's back in. All right, you good. You finally figured out how to do it, to mute your mic. So I'll put you back in. You'll just have to go back and look at the YouTube version that you missed. But yeah, you finally figured it out, I guess. But they also have what they call, I'll put it in here for you, but Presbyterianism, spell it right. I'll put it in here too as well. But I'll just mention briefly about John Knox. John Knox was a Scottish Protestant reformer who met John Calvin. He actually came to Switzerland, met the guy. And then what happened was he went back to Scotland and he formed his own variation of Calvinism, which became known as Presbyterianism, or also called the Church of Scotland, as it was called. And so Calvin influenced a lot of people. You know about that. Like I said, he was the most influential of the Protestant reformers as a whole. He influenced the Anglican Church, like in Britain, as a whole, as well. So influenced the Puritans, like in America. Um, so that's definitely the most influential overall that they had. Oh, there's one more I'll mention too. Andrew, you have to go early? You have to leave? Okay. All right,
I'll just class at 10:30.
Okay, well, just go on YouTube and watch the rest. That's no problem. So anyway, the other one I need to talk about was one more I'll give you that was also famous, which is Ulrich Zwingli. Yeah, Ulrich Zwingli. And he was a Swiss reformer in Switzerland, Zurich, Switzerland, of course, where he was. And he actually came before John Calvin. So I think Luther was first, then Zwingli, and then Calvin in that order. And he practiced as a preacher, mostly in Zurich. And he didn't quite agree either with the Catholic Church as well. In fact, Zwingli was the first one that really started pushing the idea that they shouldn't have any like convents or monasteries, like get rid of all that, which he did. He also was the first to come up with the idea to allow like clergy to marry. So he did stuff like that. And so a lot of his ideas influenced like the Protestant movements in Switzerland, Germany. I think it influenced the Anabaptist movement too, which I'll talk about later, that occurred. A lot of the churches, were very puritanical, which we talked about, which was a form of like similar to Calvinism. The big thing about Zwingli was that Zwingli was controversial over the whole communion or Lord's Supper. He and you know about it, Martin Luther got in a big argument over what the communion should be, because they couldn't agree transubstantiation versus consubstantiation. Luther thought it should be consubstantiation. Catholic Church said practice transubstantiation, but Zwingli thought it should be symbolic, basically, So, so that was one of the big differences, between those two guys. Let me hold on a second here. Somebody coming in. So, anyway, so just kind of talking about some of the famous Protestant reformers that were in the Reformation originally, overall. And what else do we need to talk about the Reformation? The Anabaptists, which are also in the PowerPoint slides and study guide as well. I need to get into who they were. The Anabaptists were radical reformers. They sometimes call it the Radical Reformation, which took off in the 1500s. And they're almost like socialists, I think, in a sense. In fact, they were you can almost compare them to that, like communism or socialism or something like that. Some of the early beliefs of that came about. They believed that you couldn't even own private property, like abolish, private property. Everybody's equal, men and women, just kind of like socialist ideas you have later. They also had new ideas on baptism, which I'll write in here for you. A lot of people called it either adult or what they called a believer's baptism. I think that's spelled right. That's usually what they called it. Yeah, adult or believer's baptism. And they believe that you shouldn't really get baptized until you're, know what you're doing, believe in Christ, basically. Maybe like an adult age, I guess at least a teenager, I guess. And so that was something new, because at the time, all the Christian churches, practiced infant baptism, including the Lutherans. So that was kind of radical. I know now that everybody does that now, a lot of people, but back then that was considered radical, for the time. Who are examples of, groups that did this later. Yeah, the Baptists, the Quakers, the Amish. You can also throw in there, if you want me to spell it for you, I'm sure you know how to spell that. But the Mennonites was another one you probably heard of too. That was kind of famous for that as well. They were Anabaptists, quote. So anyway, and I had a map to show you. There's that map, which is down here. You can see that eventually the Anabaptist movement spread throughout Germany and also into Switzerland and also into what is the Netherlands, like the Dutch areas, which are up here, where it says Amsterdam up there. You can kind of see it. So you got, Netherlands right here, Germany all through here, Switzerland down here. And but the bulk of it is right here in this area. And so that's where a lot of these groups like the Mennonites and so on kind of originate from. And then a lot of them would migrate, like the Amish and other would migrate to the United States, of course, later. So that's the so-called Anabaptist movement and the radicals that were, part of the radical Reformation that they had as a whole. Let me also talk about, I'll briefly, just for a few minutes, talk about the English Reformation that they had as well. That was just something that was part of the Reformation that started in the 1500s. It's called different names. The English Reformation was part of what they call either Anglicanism or what they call the Church of England, is what they dub it usually, which formed in the 1500s, 1530s. It's about the time period of when it started. And I won't talk much about that today, about the English Reformation and all of that. But when we get to England, I'll get more into like the Reformation. I do have a little slide here just showing you who was behind it. Obviously, you've heard of King Henry VIII. He was the one that was, behind the whole thing. That started the Protestant Reformation in England. And the church was called all kinds of names: Anglican Church, Church of England. They also call it Anglicanism, which is worldwide now as a whole. And his church, which he formed around about the 1530s, was a church which was formed for personal reasons, not for theological ideas originally. It's because he wanted a divorce to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon of Spain. And the Pope wouldn't give it to him, so he grew tired of it. And so he broke away and formed his own church. So that's basically what started the whole thing. But we'll get more into that later about the Anglican Church, but not now. So then there's one more thing I think I'll talk about today, which I did want to talk a few minutes about the Catholic Reformation, which was also called the Counter Reformation. It's called multiple names. The Catholics call it that. And I think the Protestants call it the counter one because they felt like they were trying to counter what their movement was basically doing. You can see what the Counter Reformation was that it was basically this deal where the Catholic Church started a reform movement to reaffirm its traditional Catholic views and values. That's pretty much what it was. And it was started by this Pope named Pope Paul III, the 1540s. And in 1545, he called a council in northern Italy, a place called Trent or Trento. And the Council of Trent was like a type of ecumenical council, which is like a type of theological council of the church. And they met to really first counter what the Protestants were doing because the Catholics were losing a lot of people. People were leaving the church and forming their own churches. And so they wanted to figure some way to stop that. And they also wanted to reform the church internally, to change it and all that. So those are examples of some I've got there that they did with the church to try to, change it. And they basically affirmed that, they were going to, the big thing they were going to do, about that, was to keep all of the church's sacraments, keep the sacraments in the church. I told you the 7 sacraments that were there. Remember, the Lutherans and a lot of the Protestants had gotten rid of most of them, except communion and also baptism. But they said that, we want to keep all the sacraments in the church. And so, salvation isn't just about belief in the Bible and in Jesus, in God, but also in the traditional sacraments and so on. Of course, they said that the Bible, you see there, was the major source of the religion, although they stipulated that they wanted the Vulgate edition. I'll put that in there for you. The Vulgate edition, the Latin version, I think it was St. Jerome, I believe, had translated years ago. They wanted that Bible to be used because what happened was they started translating the Bible into different languages. Like Luther started, translating the German, and part of what spread the whole Reformation, if you know about it, was a guy named, I'll put it up here, but you probably heard of Johann Gutenberg. I'll put him in. I think it's BRG. And Gutenberg was this famous printer, about this, in Germany, I think in the 15th century, close to 1500, I think, that developed one of the first movable type printing presses in Europe. And so with that, Luther and all these other guys were able to print a lot of the Protestant books. And so it spread like wildfire everywhere. So that's one of the things that occurred with that because of Gutenberg. And so Catholic Church wasn't too happy about that. In England, they started, printing their own English Bibles and so on. So, there's another thing. Oh, they even have like there was like this list of, I'll put it in here, but something the church did that you may have heard of that's very famous. But the Catholic Church came up with a list of prohibited books that you couldn't read. Pretty much anything that the church didn't agree with, Protestant faiths, and like books like Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli, any kind of book written by some Protestant guy was basically banned with these lists. And for years, these books were banned by the Catholic Church. I think the last date they stopped banning them was in, what year was it? I forgot what the ban date was on it, but it was up to the 1900s. I think it was 1900. It was a long, long time that they banned a lot of books. 1966. Wow. Yeah, it was when it was the last time that I think they had the actual book ban on all that. I think Galileo, you may have heard of famous scientists, in Europe. A lot of his books were banned by the Catholic Church as examples. So anyway, just some of the things that the church was doing to try to reform it. They also began to set up like seminaries, and you may have heard of the Jesuits. Yeah, the Jesuits came in, Society of Jesus, as they're called, their real name, and they formed in 1540. The so-called Jesuits, were very influential in the Catholic Reformation. They actually went and began reconverting everybody, and the Jesuits were like an famous order of priests They were under the Pope, and they were founded by this famous priest you've probably heard of, who was originally a soldier named Ignatius of Loyola. He actually was a soldier originally, and he eventually, what happened was he got wounded, and he had some kind of religious conversion, and decided to become a priest. And over time, by the 1540s, he formed the actual order. So he's considered one of the founders of the order. That and Saint Francis of Xavier, you may have heard of him, was another famous, founder of the Jesuits as well. And they're famous for their black, either one of these black robes, like he's wearing in that picture right there. They set up seminaries, they set up monasteries, I guess. A lot of schools, colleges, universities were founded by the Jesuits, like Loyola University, like in New Orleans is an example of that, so of the Jesuits. But they went all over the place trying to convert people and, trying to save people and, I guess, prevent the spread of Protestantism and all that. So that's most of what they did, the Jesuits. He was famous for this book he wrote. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it was called where's that book I got? Oh, I don't have it in there. Well, I didn't put it in there for some reason, but he had a book I'll put up here for you. It's called The Spiritual Exercises. I believe that's what it's called. Yeah, Spiritual Exercises. And that book, I believe, written, I think, right before the order was founded, was a book that was used to really found the order. It was based a lot on his ideas, principles of how they should, practice their order. And so it's a highly influential book. A lot of people have read it, and all that. And so he was the biggest influence really on the Jesuits. So, all right. So, like what else I had in there? I had, I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty much for the, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I could remember about oh yeah, there was one more thing I did forget about. I think it was in the key term. They had the Ursulines, which I think is called, what is the name usually called? It's the, what's the name I want to give you? Is the Order of Saint Ursula. I'll put that one in there for you as well. I'll just put that right there, but that's another famous order that was part of the Catholic Reformation that came about the 1500s. It was an order of nuns that came about, started founding convents and women's or girls' schools throughout Europe and the world, founded by a saint called Saint Ursula and all that. And that's what they became famous for. So it's kind of a famous order. It was kind of like similar to the, Jesuits, but it was for nuns at the time. There's actually a school in New Orleans called, I think it's called the Ursuline Academy, which was founded in the 1720s. It's considered one of the oldest girls type school, like the Americas. So founded by the Ursulines, the order. All right, so I don't think we're going to have, I think that's pretty much it for the beginning of the Reformation today. I think the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and, of course, discuss the some of the study guide questions we've got so far. If you want, we can do that and talk about at least the ones on the Reformation. I won't be able to go on all of them, but I'll go ahead and discuss some of the ones we've got so far. And if we got a few minutes, I'll just spend, if you want, going over like any kind of questions or comments you have, or you can send those to me later if you want overall. And let me go ahead and bring up the other slide I've got. I was using that slide because I have all those pictures in there. They're really good. But so yeah, what was the Reformation? Like I said, it was a movement where the Christianity broke up. Like it was a schism where the Protestant Reformation began. The Protestant movements started where you had all these Protestant religions like Lutheranism, Calvinism, Anglicanism, all formed because of the problems in the Catholic Church at the time. And it mostly started in the 1500s. So 1517, I guess, usually about maybe when it starts, and it goes up to about 1648 is usually when it starts. What are some causes? There's a lot of causes of it, of the Reformation. Obviously, the whole indulgence controversy was the big thing that caused it to blow up, because I told you Martin Luther, was the one that basically started it in Germany. Although corruption in the Catholic Church was a major issue, but it went back to the Middle Ages at the time. Who was Martin Luther? Martin Luther was, of course, one of the first major Protestant reformers. He was a German theology professor. The college, if you want to know, was the University of Wittenberg, was where it was, which was in Saxony, Germany. And he was also a monk in the church. I believe he was an Augustinian monk, if you want to know. He was famous for his 95 Theses, which he wrote out, which criticized the Catholic Church and the issue of indulgences. And that was the main cause of why the Reformation started. Luther, of course, later went on to write other books, including translating the Bible into German. So he was one of the first to translate the Bible, modern times, into some other language besides Latin. What do Protestant religion emerge in Germany afterwards? I told you Lutheranism, of course, originally formed, and Lutheranism, or the Church of Luther, basically broke away from the Catholic Church. And I told you they have their own theological ideas, which put a lot of emphasis on, salvation in Jesus and the Bible over the sacraments and good works. You saw how they rejected all the sacraments except two of them, communion and, of course, baptism. So, and then we have John Calvin. And Calvin was originally from France. I don't know if I told you that or not. He was a French Protestant reformer, and he later fled to Switzerland. And Calvin started his own brand of Calvinism, which was called later that. Although they actually have another name for it too, which I didn't give you. They sometimes call it, I'll put it on the screen for you. It's called Reformed Christianity, is what some people like to dub it. And a lot of their churches are sometimes called Reformed churches or something like that. And so that's who Calvin was. And I told you Calvin influenced other people, especially I told you John Knox, who influenced Presbyterianism in Scotland. What types of beliefs dominate Calvinism? I'll tell you the two big ones was predestination, the belief that God had already elected a certain few to be saved and go to heaven and not be damned to go to hell. So this is something that God had already predicted from, I guess, the beginning of the universe or something like that. And then I told you how the Calvinists, a lot of them believed in theocracy. They set up a lot of cities and states in Switzerland that were based on that, where religious authority controlled everybody. You had to follow all the laws of religion. If you didn't, remember, you got fined, imprisoned, or you even could be executed if you didn't follow certain ideas. Then I told you about the Anabaptists, how they were part of the Radical Reformation as a whole. They started in Germany, and Anabaptists, I didn't give you the translation of it too, but if you want the translation of it, it means actually supposedly I'll put it on here, but it means rebaptizer is what the translation of it. Suppose that's what it means, or to be baptized again, because a lot of people had already been baptized as an infant. And I told you they started believing these ideas that were crazy at the time, like you can't have private property, and then they also believed in like a believer's baptism or adult baptism. So that was something, that was kind of, like I said, radical for the time. Who are Anabaptists? I told you, Quakers, Amish, Mennonites. Later, the Baptists today were influenced by them as well. So a lot of those all practice adult or believers' baptisms. I also talked about the, I don't have it in the study guide, but I did talk about the Anglicanism, the English Reformation, where Henry VIII broke away and formed the Church of England. But I told you it was all because of he wanted a divorce. That one we'll talk about later. I don't know if I'm going to quiz you on that later, because I'll have a canvas quiz coming up later on the Reformation. But I wouldn't worry about that for now. But I wanted to explain to you that there were other reform movements that were in Protestantism. Then they had the Catholic Reformation, or Counter one. That was where I told you the Catholic Church began making its own internal reforms to change the church the way they wanted it, and then to also counter the Protestant movements that were breaking away. And I told you they kept all the traditional sacraments that were in the church. They kept the Latin Bible. Oh, they kept the Latin Mass. Forgot about that. Of course, everything was in Latin, back then with the Catholic Church until the 20th century. So they even banned certain books, like a prohibition on reading certain books, Protestant and other heretical type authors. And then let's see what else. Then we talked about the Council of Trent, which was an ecumenical church council that the Catholic Church started 1545, and it was part of all these reforms I was talking about. That was started by Pope Paul III. These one got started, and so they're the ones that got it going. Then I think we talked about some of the last things we did was we talked about the Jesuits, right? Which was that order of Catholic priests that was started in the 1540s, so-called Society of Jesus. They did have a nickname, the Jesuits, which I didn't get to on the bottom, but I'll get to that. But we did talk about the founder, of course, of the Jesuits, which was Ignatius of Loyola. Loyola is like one of several founders I told you about, and he became known for his book, The Spiritual Exercises, which influenced the order a lot. And their order, was involved in a lot of attempts to try to save Catholicism and prevent the spread of Protestantism. And of course, I told you they found a lot of schools and seminaries as well. I didn't tell you this, but the Jesuits had a name. Sometimes they were called or nicknamed the Soldiers of Christ, because they were kind of seen as this kind of militant type priests who've had a lot of influence in the Catholic Church. And the current Pope Francis, if you know about it, is actually a Jesuit. So that's interesting about that. Now, I did talk about the Ursulines, which are not in the study guide, but remember the Ursulines were an order of nuns that was also famous, that was founded by Saint Ursula, that founds like schools and convents and stuff like that. So that's about it that we've done so far in the lecture material in the study guide. I'll finish the Reformation next week, and then we'll, of course, be moving on to talk about I think our next thing we'll be getting into is exploration, the so-called Age of Discovery. And I guess that's it for now. I'll go ahead and open up. If there's any questions that anybody wants, let me know. Comments that you've got right now. If anybody's on YouTube, you can send me a comment or question right now. If you have anybody that's on right now on StreamYard, y'all have any questions? If you want to unmute your mic, you can. So anybody have any questions? Sorry about the technical difficulties we had at the beginning. So Ava has no questions. Emily, you have a question? You want to unmute your mic? I'm trying to, but you have to unmute yours. Emily? Oh, it's not working? Okay. Yeah, you have to make sure your mic's working or have headphones, I think. So cool guy, no questions. She's typing her question. So anybody on YouTube have anything? I think there's one person on there right now. Okay. Trying to type it in. All right, yeah, hurry up. But anyway, if anybody else, Ava, cool guy, if you don't have any questions, you can go ahead and leave. Emily, I'll just wait. But pretty much everybody else, I'll see you next week. And yeah, there's going to be a quiz coming up, of course, Canvas quiz coming up next week. I'll talk about that Tuesday's class in my stream on YouTube and StreamYard. And just a reminder before we go, don't forget, if you have anything that you haven't sent to me yet, like your book report selection, send that to me. Make sure you complete the pre-test. Send me the contract policy page if you haven't done that yet. Anybody interested in also the Veterans Oral History Project, let me know via email as well. So that's it for that. Emily's got a question though. Oh, well, the Protestants broke away from Emily. Emily's asking about the Catholic Church and all that. Yeah, the Protestants broke away from the Catholic Church. But what was going on was that the Jesuits and the Catholics were trying to bring the Protestants back, trying to reconvert them and all that, which is why they call it the Counter Reformation and so on. So that's what that is, basically. So anyway, that's it for today. I hope y'all have a good weekend coming up. Hopefully next time we won't have so many technical difficulties. But on YouTube, let me know if you have any questions, comments. Remember, you can send me your comments, questions through YouTube. You do get bonus points. I think I've told you this before about this, about that. I think it's +2 bonus points for comments and +3 bonus points for questions. And that's you get one of those per lecture. Okay. So send me comments, questions you can think of. And that's it for today. Okay. So y'all take care. Have a good weekend again.